The Pietermaritzburg High Court has postponed to October 26 ruling on whether the prosecutor in the Zuma arms deal case should be removed. Judge Pete Cohen heard the arguments in an application brought by Zuma over 2 days ago. Now, Zuma's legal team argued the prosecutor, Billy Downer, has acted unprofessional and should not be granted the title to prosecute him. Meanwhile, the National Prosecuting Authority says Zuma is simply recycling old facts. Joining me now to unpack this further is Johannesburg-based attorney Benedict Fury. Good to see you, Benedict. Now, quickly, the issue of a title to prosecute seems quite a confusing one from a legal perspective. Now, let's see how you can help Africa break this down in layman's terms. What's this all about?
Yeah, so we have a provision in our Criminal Procedure Act which provides that an accused is allowed to plead along with his plea of not guilty that the prosecution does not have a title to prosecute him. Typically, that has been interpreted to mean a strict formalistic title, like a legal degree, for instance, or a certificate that empowers you to prosecute. In recent years, our courts have been expanding that test to include instances, for instance, where the prosecution authority is acting in bad faith or they're prosecuting without regard for an accused's rights, fair trial rights. So what the former president is actually arguing in this case is that the prosecutor, Billy Downer, his conduct is such that it's very clear that there's a bias and an intent to prosecute the former president at all costs. And for that matter, there should not be a title to prosecute on his part. The problem with the president's argument is that in those instances where we see a bias or a malice, the title to prosecute actually sits with the prosecuting authority as a whole, rather than an individual prosecutor. So that becomes quite a bit of a hurdle for the former president because his application was very scant on facts around the prosecution authority as a whole, not having title to prosecute. Hence, the regurgitation of old arguments that have been dealt with in other cases, for instance, and matters that are not new to the South African public at this point in time.
Well, Benedict, some other lawyers in South Africa are already thinking that the former president is acting out of script. But again, isn't the case of bias enough for anyone to ask someone to stand down from the team?
It has been held to be enough in some circumstances, but when it has been found that an individual prosecutor has been biased, that prosecutor has been substituted with someone else who's just managed to continue the prosecution. What the former president is asking here is even bigger than that. He's not saying replace Billy Downer. He's saying Billy Downer on his own is indicative of the prosecuting authority as a whole being biased, and therefore he shouldn't even sit a day answering to these charges.
Well, anyway, now looking at your developments, the prosecution seems to argue that a prosecutor doesn't have to be unbiased, but rather just fair. And that's an important distinction. But again, having looked at the arguments for and against, which way do you think Judge Cohen will go?
There's a decision of the Supreme Court of Appeal. It's called the Porritt case, which actually binds Judge Cohen. And that case basically articulates the test that I've articulated earlier here, that says that when we're talking about prosecutorial bias and an individual prosecutor, there are other mechanisms in our law that allow for the removal of that particular individual prosecutor, and not so much the stopping of a prosecution in its entirety. So I think what we're likely to see end up in this particular instance is that Billy Downer may be removed. Some of the things he's accused of doing are actually quite serious, leaking information to the media before it's become in the public domain, instructing the media when to publish stories, etc., and how to publish them. one-on-one conversations with the media. So in that particular instance, we might see Billy Downer himself being asked to recuse himself, but I don't believe that the former president will be afforded the opportunity of not sitting his trial.
Well, Benedict, many thanks for unpacking this for us.